Welcome to the channel. In many ways, nature is stronger than man. It's worth remembering this. A true wilderness survival story. The lake was already dark when they finished unloading the van. Lake Missinaibi lay in northern Ontario, far from towns, roads, or easy rescue. In late September, the wilderness there felt ancient and indifferent. Cold water. Endless forest. Rock walls rising straight out of the lake. On Thursday evening, September 30th, 1971, after unloading their van and setting up camp on the shore of remote Lake Missinaibi in northern Ontario, darkness settled over the water. Two men, one a wildlife filmmaker, the other a photographer named Jerry, had come north to document indigenous pictographs reported along the lake's rocky shoreline. The plan was to capture 16mm color footage for a nature film about Ontario. The filmmaker was no stranger to wilderness travel. In earlier years, following service in the U.S. Marine Corps, he had hunted big game in isolated regions of Canada, the American West, and South America. Over time, firearms had been replaced by cameras, and hunting trips by filming expeditions. Jerry, his companion, loved the outdoors deeply and had extensive experience with photography and canoe travel. The two had recently worked together on a nature film in Ohio. That night, as they ate a late meal by the glow of a gas lantern, they noticed fresh tracks of bears, moose, and wolves in the sand near their tent. Still, the surroundings felt peaceful rather than threatening. They talked eagerly about the discoveries the next day might bring. Neither sensed the danger ahead. Before the following day ended, Jerry would be dead, and the filmmaker would be fighting for his own survival. They awoke at dawn on Friday, October 1st, to steady rain drumming on the tent canvas. Low clouds covered the surrounding hills. Because they had eaten late the night before, they decided to skip breakfast and make a short scouting trip by canoe. The idea was simply to inspect promising rock faces for pictographs along the main arm of Lake Missinaibi. They launched an aluminum canoe fitted with a small outboard motor. Since the weather was too dark for filming, they brought only paddles, life jackets, maps, and binoculars. In their eagerness to get on the water, they left all major survival gear behind in the van. No note was left describing their plans or expected return, an oversight that would later matter greatly. As they left the sheltered bay near their campsite, they took note of a fallen spruce tree at the narrow entrance, intending to use it as a landmark on the return trip. They paddled southwest along the southern shoreline, carefully scanning the cliffs. After traveling roughly 10 miles, they reached the mouth of the Whitefish River. Farther on, about 14 miles from camp, a tall rocky promontory caught their attention. According to their map, this was Ferry Point, where a bay meets the main body of the lake. Rain continued to fall lightly, and small waves rolled across the water. The conditions seemed manageable. They crossed toward the cliffs, closing to within about 50 feet of the rock face. Jerry was the first to spot a pictograph and pointed it out. At first, the images blended with the mosses and mineral stains on the stone, but soon human figures became unmistakable. As they drifted along the cliff, more drawings emerged. Absorbed in their discovery, they failed to notice the danger approaching from the southwest. The first warning was a sudden gust of wind that struck from multiple directions, ripping dead branches from trees atop the cliff. Almost immediately, a wave 3 to 4 feet high slammed into the canoe, followed by an even larger one. The canoe capsized. They were now in open water at an exposed point of the lake. Wind and waves had a long stretch of water to build strength, and the surrounding canyon-like terrain funneled the storm directly into Ferry Point. The vertical rock wall offered no place to land. Waves could easily have smashed them unconscious against the stone. Both men surfaced around the same time in the icy water. One paddle was lost, but Jerry's paddle floated nearby and was grabbed. Their life jackets, not secured to the canoe, were quickly blown away. The overturned canoe trapped air at first, rolling violently in the waves. When the air finally escaped, the canoe sank into a vertical position, with only a few inches of the bow above water, barely enough to cling to. Waves grew to 4 to 6 feet, breaking constantly over their heads. The filmmaker straddled the keel and held the bow. Jerry clung to the side and pulled a floating 6-gallon gas can toward himself for support. Both men were dressed for cold weather, but the filmmaker's boots filled with water and slipped off. Jerry soon realized his boots were gone as well. In the chaos, removing clothing was impossible and likely would have been fatal. Within minutes, the cold began to take its toll. Jerry suffered severe stomach pain and cramps, likely from swallowing water. Hands became numb and unresponsive. Thinking grew sluggish. Panic never fully set in, but strength faded quickly. At first, they believed the wind would drive them toward shore. Instead, it pushed them parallel to the coastline. Powerful underwater currents generated by the crashing waves held the submerged stern of the canoe away from land. Attempts to dive down and detach the motor failed, the cold made holding breath impossible. After roughly 20 minutes, they drifted away from the cliff. Jerry attempted to swim for shore but was forced back by the waves. The filmmaker managed to extend the paddle, pulling him back to the canoe. They clung there for nearly an hour more, shaking violently. Eventually, the wind angled them toward a small rocky outcrop, but just before they could reach it, the canoe was turned aside again. Jerry shouted that the wind would never carry them in. His voice carried despair. He soon admitted his hands could no longer hold on. Using the paddle threaded through the handle of the gas can, they created a crude flotation aid and drifted like that for nearly another hour. By then, they had been in the water close to 2 hours and had traveled 3/4 of a mile. Jerry's face had turned a deep red from cold exposure. Exhausted beyond endurance, he decided to attempt the swim again, preferring action to certain death. The filmmaker agreed to go as well. Communication was barely possible. Wind tore words away, jaws hung slack from cold, and lips could not form clear speech. No plan could be made. Jerry pushed off first. As the filmmaker struggled to follow, the gas can's buoyancy and the wind pulled him away. Jerry swam hard for several minutes, then rolled onto his back. For a moment, it seemed he might succeed. He appeared strong, stronger than his companion. Riding a wave crest, the filmmaker saw Jerry spit out water. On the next wave, Jerry rolled face down. When the wave passed, he did not reappear. Jerry was gone. There was no sign of panic or struggle. Watching him disappear, the filmmaker briefly thought that drowning might not be so terrible. His mind was already clouded by cold and shock. For a moment, he even believed Jerry might surface again, holding his breath. But the waves made it clear, this hope was madness. Something inside him, however, refused to let him give up. He continued drifting with the paddle and gas can. About 20 minutes later, he reached shore roughly 50 feet from where Jerry had vanished. He could not control his body. Arms and legs felt rubbery and useless. Crawling over rocks required dragging himself forward by handholds. When he finally made it onto land, he realized he was still clutching the gas can. He set it down and lost consciousness. When he awoke minutes later, he knew survival depended on recovering the canoe. Hiking back to the van through miles of swamp and forest without food, shoes, or fire-starting tools would likely be fatal. The canoe, drifting north in the bay, was his only hope. Using the paddle as a crutch, he staggered along the shoreline, falling repeatedly and struggling through brush. His feet, numb and bare, felt no pain. Eventually, he realized he was completely naked. At some point, in a confused state, he had stripped off all his clothing. He forced himself to turn back, retrieve his clothes and car keys, and dress again. Hours later, near mid-afternoon, the wind eased and sunlight broke through the clouds. He waited on a rocky point for the canoe to drift closer. Spotting a dry cedar log, he tied string to it and used it as a float to swim out once more, an act that required immense willpower. Reaching the canoe was brutal. A wave slammed the bow into his groin, nearly knocking him unconscious. Somehow he recovered, tied the canoe to the log, and began towing it shoreward. The line broke. He had to repeat the process. Eventually, he managed to drag the half-submerged canoe onto the rocks and bail it out. Each time progress was made, waves refilled it. The struggle lasted nearly 2 hours. By around 5 p.m., he launched again, attempting to paddle back toward Ferry Point. Strong winds forced him to lie exhausted in the canoe, where he immediately fell asleep. Darkness came. When the lake finally calmed, he resumed paddling, rowing briefly, blacking out, then rowing again. All night rain fell. To stay warm, he wrapped his rain gear around his legs. Gradually, strength returned. By early morning, he could paddle for longer stretches. Navigating close to the southern shoreline, he searched every inlet. Eventually, he heard the roar of Whitefish Falls and knew where he was. Between 3 and 4 a.m., more than 16 hours after the canoe capsized, he recognized the twisted spruce marking their campsite. He reached shore and climbed out. The tent lay flattened. Turning on the van's headlights, he saw the damage. Bears had torn through the camp, destroying most of their gear. Rain had soaked what remained. In his weakened state, this final blow nearly broke him. He crawled into the van, chose the driest sleeping bag, and tried to rest. Instead, he became violently ill, vomiting water and blood throughout the night. At dawn, he loaded the canoe and drove south. Several miles later, he spotted a radio antenna near the road and found a remote forestry station. Though the lone attendant spoke only French, he managed to communicate that there had been an accident and that police were needed. He also requested medical help. Later that morning, provincial police met him on the road. He described where Jerry had gone under and mentioned leaving the gas can on shore as a marker. The officers said they would search by boat. In Chapleau, he was admitted to the hospital. He called his wife in Ohio and asked her to notify Jerry's family. On Sunday night, police returned with the news. Jerry's body had been recovered near the site of the accident. He was fully clothed except for one glove. The officers noted that his body was relaxed, with no signs of panic or struggle. They believed he had likely lost consciousness before drowning. The tragedy was the result of several small factors converging: an unseen storm, towering cliffs that blocked escape, freezing water, a motor-weighted canoe that could not drift ashore, and the loss of life jackets. Most critically, the absence of basic survival items, shoes, matches, food, and navigation tools, forced the survivor to risk his life repeatedly to recover the canoe instead of traveling on foot. Under different conditions, these mistakes might have been only an inconvenience. On that October day at Lake Missinaibi, together they became fatal. The survivor hoped that by telling the story, others might avoid a similar fate.